We got a lot to review today. We've got 57 companies with dividend increases, 4 special dividends, 4 companies that have announced stock repurchase programs, and if you stick around, you're also going to get to learn about the 4 companies that have decreased their dividends and 1 that has actually decided to suspend their dividend payments. And we're starting right here with PriceSmart, and they've announced an increase in their dividend by 7%. This is a semi-annual dividend payer, which means they're going to pay it out twice a year. And you can see here, there's a couple of different dates that are listed. Ex-dividend date for the first time is going to be on February 15th with a pay date on February 28th, and the next time this year will be an ex-dividend date on August 14th with a pay date on August 31st. And right now, the forward yield is 1.23%. Public Storage is up next with a 50% increase in their dividend, giving them a forward yield of 3.89%. They'll go ex-dividend on March 14th with a pay date on March 30th. With the first of our special dividends is CNA Financial. That special dividend will be equivalent to $1.20 for each share that you own, and they announced a dividend increase of 5%. This will give them a forward yield of 4.03%. They'll go ex-dividend on February 17th with a pay date on March 9th. And we're looking at a 5.5% increase from Brookfield Renewable Partners. They're going to have a forward yield of 4.73%. They'll go ex-dividend on February 27th with a pay date on March 31st. Next up is an 11.1% increase from First Service, and they're going to have a forward yield of 0.64%. They'll go ex-dividend on March 30th with a pay date on April 11th. Next up is Independent Bank, and they've announced an increase to their dividend by 7.8%, which should give them a forward yield of 2.51%. Now you can see here that the ex-dividend date was in December with a pay date in January. So as this hasn't been updated, and I did check their investor relations page, I think we can anticipate that we would likely see a pay date sometime in the month of April. Kforce is our next company to announce that dividend increase, and they are giving 20% to their shareholders, which gives them a forward yield of 2.5%. They'll go ex-dividend on March 9th with a pay date on March 24th. And I did just want to bring everyone's attention to the chart to the right, where you can get some additional information about the company, including the market cap, the forward PE, the yield for the trailing 12 months, and the year-over-year revenue growth, as well as the short interest. And you can see here from this chart that in the last 5 days, Kforce is actually up by 1.25% in share price. Next up, let's talk about Power Integrations and their 5.6% increase to their dividend. This gives them a forward yield of 0.86%. They'll go ex-dividend on February 27th with a pay date on March 31st. We've got a double-digit increase from UDR of 10.5%. This is going to raise their annual dividend up to a 3.82% yield. Looks like the Q4 dividend was paid out on January 31st, so we potentially can expect the next pay date to be sometime at the end of April. And we also have double digits coming out of Northern Oil and Gas with 13.3% increase, giving them a forward yield of 4.36%. They'll go ex-dividend at the end of March on the 29th with a pay date on April 28th. Waste Management, ticker symbol WM, has just given their shareholders a 7.7% raise. Their forward yield is 1.85%. They'll go ex-dividend March 9th with a pay date on March 24th. TMX Group is giving their shareholders a 4.8% increase to the dividend, giving them a forward yield of 2.65%. They'll go ex-dividend February 23rd with a pay date on March 10th. BP just announced an approximately 10% increase to their dividend. They'll go ex-dividend on February 16th with a March 31st payout. OneMain Holdings is raising their dividend by 5.3%, giving them a pretty hefty forward yield of 8.55%. They'll go ex-dividend on February 16th with a pay date on February 24th. Xylem is announcing their dividend by 10%, giving them a forward yield of 1.27%. They're going to go ex-dividend on February 21st with a pay date on March 22nd. DuPont has announced a dividend increase by 9.1%. They'll have a forward yield of 1.89% with an ex-dividend on February 27th and a pay date on March 15th. T. Rowe Price has announced a dividend increase of 1.7%, which is going to get you an extra 2 cents for each share that you own. Their forward yield is 3.94%. They'll go ex-dividend March 14th with a pay date on March 30th. We have a 3.4% increase from Midland States Bancorp, and they are going to have a forward yield of 4.57%. They'll go ex-dividend on February 16th with a pay date on February 24th. We've got quite the hefty dividend increase from Primerica of 18.2%, which gives them a forward yield of 1.56%. They'll go ex-dividend on February 17th with a pay date on March 14th. 3M has given us a 0.7% increase in their dividend, so it equates to an additional penny for each share that you own, giving them a forward yield of 5.13%. They'll go ex-dividend this week on February 16th with a pay date on March 12th. We got a 50% increase in the dividend from Equinor this week, and in addition, for shareholders, they're each going to get 60 cents for all the shares that you own. This gives them a forward yield of 4.1%. They'll go ex-dividend May 11th with a pay date on May 25th. Equity Lifestyle Properties has raised their dividend by 9.1%, giving them a forward yield of 2.47%. They'll go ex-dividend on March 30th with a pay date on April 14th. Yum Brands, the company that owns places like Taco Bell, KFC, and Pizza Hut, just announced an increase to their dividend by 6.1%. This gives them a forward yield of 1.87%. They'll go ex-dividend on February 21st with a pay date on March 10th. Prudential Financial announced a 4.2% increase in their dividend, giving them a forward yield of 4.86%. They'll go ex-dividend on February 7th with a pay date on March 16th. Willis Towers Watson has announced an increase in their dividend by 2.4%, giving them a dividend yield of 1.31%. They'll go ex-dividend on March 30th with a pay date on April 17th. Corning is raising their dividend by 3.7%, giving them a forward yield of 3.19%. They'll go ex-dividend February 27th with a pay date on March 30th. Monolithic Power is raising their dividend by 33.3%, giving them a forward yield of 0.86%. They'll go ex-dividend March 30th with a pay date on April 14th. Century Communities is raising their dividend by 15%, giving them a forward yield of 1.47%. They'll go ex-dividend on February 28th with a pay date on March 15th. Phillips 66 is raising their dividend by 8.2%, giving them a forward yield of 4.09%. They'll go ex-dividend February 17th with a pay date on March 1st. Avalon Bay Communities is raising their dividend by 3.8%, giving them a forward yield of 3.64%. They'll go ex-dividend March 30th with a pay date on April 17th. Renaissance Re, isn't that fun to say, is increasing their dividend by 2.7%, giving them a forward yield of 0.7%. They'll go ex-dividend on March 14th with a pay date on March 30th. We've got a hefty 26.2% increase coming out of Ares Management, which gives them a forward yield of 3.6%. They'll go ex-dividend March 16th with a pay date on March 31st. Trane Technologies is offering an 11.9% increase to its shareholders with a forward yield of 1.64%. They're going to go ex-dividend on March 2nd with a pay date on March 31st. Tempur Sealy is lifting their dividend by 11%, giving them a forward yield of 1.07%. They'll go ex-dividend coming up on February 22nd with a pay date on March 9th. Thomson Reuters has announced a 10.1% increase to their dividend, giving them a forward yield of 1.67%. They'll go ex-dividend on February 22nd with a pay date on March 16th. We've got a 9.8% increase from ITT, giving them a forward yield of 1.27%. They'll go ex-dividend March 8th with a pay date on April 3rd. Interpublic Group of Companies is raising their dividend by 6.9%. I actually just discovered this company when I was doing research on the dividend nights, so I'm excited to see it again. They've got a forward yield of 3.25%. They'll go ex-dividend on February 28th with a pay date on March 15th, and the company just authorized a new $350 million share buyback program. Ametek Incorporated has increased their dividend by 13.6%, giving them a forward yield of 0.69%. They'll go ex-dividend on March 9th with a pay date on March 31st. Terex just announced double-digit increases of 15.4% to their dividend, giving them a forward yield of 1.17%. They'll go ex-dividend on March 8th with a pay date on March 20th. The New York Times has raised their dividend by 22.2%. This company's been around since 1851. This is going to give them a forward yield of 1.09%. They'll go ex-dividend April 4th with a pay date on April 20th. Warrior Met Coal has raised their dividend by 16.7%, giving them a forward yield of 0.75%. They'll go ex-dividend this week, coming up on February 16th with a pay date on February 27th. Not only is Robert Half raising their quarterly dividend by 11.6%, but they've also announced the repurchase of 10 million shares. This will give them a forward yield of 2.32%. They'll go ex-dividend on February 23rd with the pay date on March 15th. First Bancorp is raising their dividend by 16.7%, giving them a forward yield of 4.01%. They're going to go ex-dividend on February 23rd with a pay date on March 10th. Allegiant just announced an increase in their quarterly dividend by 9.8%. They're going to have a forward yield of 1.52%. They'll go ex-dividend March 14th with a pay date on March 31st. On Thursday, RPT Realty announced an increase in their quarterly dividend by 7.7%, giving them a pretty good forward yield of 5.5%. They're going to go ex-dividend on March 17th with a pay date on April 3rd. Sleep Country Canada Holdings Incorporated is raising their dividend by 10.3%, so you can sleep better at night on their mattresses. They've got a forward yield of 2.57%. They go ex-dividend February 16th with a pay date on February 28th. Park Aerospace has announced an increase in their quarterly dividend by 25%, which gives them a forward yield of 3.54%. And they also announced a special dividend for shareholders of $1 for each share that you own. They'll go ex-dividend on March 31st with a pay date on May 5th. Weyerhaeuser has announced a dividend increase of 5.6%, giving them a forward yield of 2.25%. They'll go ex-dividend March 2nd with a pay date on March 17th. Ascent Group has announced an 8.7% increase in their dividend, giving them a forward yield of 2.36%. They'll go ex-dividend March 9th with pay date on March 20th. We're in the home stretch with a few more companies to talk about that are giving increases, and we're right here with Ameren, who's raising their dividend by 6.8%. This gives them a forward yield of 2.97%. They'll go ex-dividend March 14th with a pay date on March 31st. Southern Copper just announced a 100% increase to their dividend. They're going to go ex-dividend on February 13th with a pay date on March 1st. So if you want to be privy to the divvy, make sure you purchase your shares on Monday. Masco is raising their quarterly dividend by 1.8%, giving them a forward yield of 2.06%. They'll go ex-dividend on February 22nd with a pay date on March 13th. We've got double-digit increases out of KBR of 12.5%, giving them a forward yield of 1.03%. They'll go ex-dividend on March 14th with a pay date on April 14th. We've got two more companies with some good news, and then we've got to talk about the bad news, those that have decreased their dividends or even eliminated them. But we're going to talk right now first about Vulcan Materials, who announced an increase of 7.5% to their dividend. This gives them a forward yield of 0.93%. They'll go ex-dividend March 3rd with a pay date on March 20th. American Homes for Rent is raising their quarterly dividend by 22.2%, giving them a forward yield of 2.6%. They'll go ex-dividend March 14th with a pay date on March 31st. And on to some of the more disappointing news, and we're here with VF Corp, who announced a reduction in their dividend by 41.2%. They still have a forward yield of 4.21%. They'll go ex-dividend on March 9th with a pay date on March 21st. And if you look at the chart on the right, you can see that there was a pretty steep drop-off in the share price over the course of the last week. Pernod Ricard announced a dividend decrease of 4.5%. Their forward yield is now at 1.55%. They'll go ex-dividend February 22nd with a pay date on March 3rd. A massive dividend cut coming out of First Bank of 79.7%, decreasing your dividends from 29 cents a share down to 6 cents a share. And an even larger dividend reduction came out of BB Stores, where they reduced the dividend by 86.7%, meaning that shareholders are only going to get 2 cents for each share that they owned. And finally, we have an announcement from Core Energy, who has decided to suspend their dividend payments on their common preferred stock. They cited that it was a combination of declining volumes and increased costs in its California systems. And that just seems like the saddest note to end this video on. So let's talk about something good. Let's talk about dividend strategy and dividend nights. If you haven't seen these videos, go check them out now.